the good fortune to be on the Prime Minister's trip out to Tokyo and then on to Hiroshima for the last 4 or 5 days. And it's been fascinating. He started off in Tokyo unveiling a load of billions of pounds of Japanese investment in the UK, some of which may transpire and some of which may not. And then, of course, he moved into the heavy business of the G7 itself. And it was really interesting watching that event be, I guess, overshadowed is the wrong word, but kind of dominated by the arrival of President Zelensky in a French jet. And the whole idea it was to bounce him onto some of those neutral countries who have basically continued to do business with Russia, who haven't taken sides in that war. And he was put in a room with, of course, Lula from Brazil and Modi from India. But we do not know yet whether that will reap any rewards in terms of them shifting their position on Ukraine, Russia, or whether we will continue to see this fundamental split between how Western, inverted commas, Western countries, including Japan, see this and how the global South, inverted commas, sees this. And it was absolutely fascinating. And Rishi Sunak is a man of great energy, but I could see in his eyes when I was sat in that press conference at the end of the G7, he was starting to look just a little bit tired. He looked a little forlorn. He looked kind of disappointed in the collective lobby. It was the first question from the BBC political editor, and instead of asking about the success of getting Zelensky to the G7, which I think people have let known was Rishi Sunak's original idea about a month ago in a conversation with the Ukrainian leader, instead he was hit with a question about Suella Braverman's speeding offence, which is something you got the impression that he knew possibly nothing, at best next to nothing, and therefore he just gave the very basic answer about, she'd done this incredibly minor offence and had paid a fine. And immediately you could see people jumping on the idea because he was asked if he had confidence in her, and because he didn't immediately say, yes, I have confidence, there was a period of a couple of hours where the story started to roll that maybe the Prime Minister hadn't expressed confidence in her, and the Downing Street machine, amid all these logistical challenges of getting to the airport and getting back to London, were trying to sort of douse the story down, saying, well, actually he does have confidence in her, but he is also going to have a little chat with Sir Laurie Magnus, his ethics advisor. And as a kind of aside, I do love the fact that it's very British establishment to consider that a former investment banker is going to be the right person to go to for any kind of questions of ethics. It's so very, very British.
Yeah. Well, if he'd been Prime Minister a little longer, he'd know it was absolute familiar syndrome to be on the other side of the world discussing huge matters of politics, geopolitics, and then to be bombarded by the travelling pack who sort of follow you around at the back of your aircraft like a crowd of schoolboy tormentors, insisting on chucking the last question you ever want all the time that you're on this trip. But I mean, he did though, Kate, express confidence, or his office did this morning, which looks as if you'd imagine, barring some really unforeseen turn of events in this speeding gate story, that she's going to get through this.
Yeah, I think she will. I think what's even more telling, actually, was when the Prime Minister entered the House of Commons today, because the Home Secretary had already been up answering Home Office questions. Rishi Sunak had a statement to make on the G7. He came into the chamber, she was already sat down, and he sort of patted her on the back in quite a warm way and sort of said, you were right.
And he knew that was being looked at.
Yeah, he knew that people would pick up on that. And then in a statement in Parliament, he said, look, I've spoken to both sides, I've asked for some more information, and, a decision will come in due course. I think there is a sense tonight from Downing Street that they would like to not play this down, but they would like to see this sort of end. I think it's a slightly muddy story about what she asked civil servants, which is potentially what the Prime Minister wants to know, whether she asked them to do it or whether she asked them whether she could. Some might say there's no real difference there, but I think for others, it's less about what she has or hasn't done and more about this question again about, her behaviour, whether she feels like she's entitled to different treatment, and actually whether the Prime Minister's response to this kind of thing is good enough. He's a managerial politician. He's a very professional man. He likes to follow the right steps to things. But there are some who will say a leader should really govern by instinct, by their gut instincts. And actually, in these circumstances, really, it's down to a leader to say, you know what, enough. She's got to go. The wider context, though, for her remaining in position, if you like, is on Thursday we're going to get these, net migration figures, which will be high. She is incredibly tough on immigration, tougher even than some of her own cabinet colleagues who feel uncomfortable about her approach. And, there's a lot to go, a lot further to go for the party to really get a handle on the promises it's made to the electorate about keeping those numbers down.
Yeah, look, I mean, that's going to be a huge, huge moment. And also in this dynamic between the Home Secretary, the Prime Minister and the government and Westminster politics more generally. But I mean, look, you can see why Rishi Sunak, the last thing he wants to do is lose or sack the Home Secretary over a thing like this. The way that the commentators on the right of politics rallied round her over these last 24 hours or so, calling her a victim of a conspiracy, saying the Remainers were out to get her. If for some reason Sunak decided he's going to get rid of her now, which I don't think was remotely likely, he'd instantly be on the wrong side of those powerful, loud voices.
I mean, she has become something of a standard bearer for the right, and yes, he would face the gales of dissent from that wing of the party if he did get rid of her. And it's a tricky one, isn't it? Because you kind of look weak if you have members of your cabinet who are misbehaving and you just can't sack them because you feel scared of their friends shouting at you. But I think the opposite is also true, that he feels that if he keeps sacking people for every single misdemeanor that they ever do, then that looks like kind of weakness in the face of, inverted commas, the blob, otherwise known as the media, or the civil servants who might have fed certain stories to the media, or whatever it is. There's a bit of a kind of, you lose in different ways if you go into this in a blanket way, one way or another. And I think that's why when you look at how the previous cabinet minister scandals we've had since October have been handled, they've all been handled in a totally different way. Gavin Williamson appears to have either been nudged quite quickly or realised quite quickly his time was up, and so the ethics advisor didn't get pulled in at all, if there was one then. But it was all quite quick. With Zahawi, the ethics advisor was brought in, and I remember it was all very rapid on the Sunday morning. We got the outcome of Magnus's investigation, and Zahawi sacked almost at the same time. And then, do you remember with Raab, it was much more nuanced. You could really see Rishi Sunak straining every sinew for what felt like around 24 hours after getting the Magnus report into his allegations of bullying, because I think he did want to rally behind Raab, who was his deputy, he was the Justice Secretary, and in the end he felt that he couldn't defend him. But it was quite touch and go. And I think this one he might be drawing a line where he says, actually, I can't just sack people every time they're on the front page of a Sunday newspaper. But look, I think there's two issues here. I mean, as Kate was saying, the public don't like it when the people who make the rules break the rules. They really don't like it when they make the rules, break the rules, and then try and kind of wriggle out of it or not do their time, if you like. And secondly, of course, the fact that the Mirror newspaper was on this a month ago, and Braverman's special advisor lied to them repeatedly, saying that there was no speeding fine. So, I wouldn't be surprised if that spokesperson gets sacked and Braverman possibly survives.
Yeah, this is one of our listeners. The speeding fine is a nonsense. The whole story is a nonsense. What a waste of time and money getting the ethics advisor to look at it. I can understand why Suella Braverman looked at a solo speed course option. There's no harm in that. And in the end, she paid the fine. What's the difficulty? So it amounted to nothing. Her thought process and consideration of options are being aired. People are poor and starving. That should be the focus. So that is that view. Also got to be said, for at the time, an Attorney General to ask officials in the Attorney General's department in government to intervene and explore what might be done when it came to the speed awareness course. That is engaging the machinery of government in the sort of judicial side of government as well. That cannot be right. But equally, you can breach the rules without being sacked. There are lesser, gradations of punishment, including a reprimand.
There are, but I think why this issue is particularly difficult, and it's why people are struggling. I mean, I can see the text just like you can, and it's really getting people wound up on either side, is that this is not just about, I mean, that person who you've just read that message out, there isn't a solo speed course option. Anybody who has been fined for speeding, you will be sent a letter offering you to take the points on your license and pay the fine, or you will be offered potentially a course if you're within the parameters for that. There is no option for you to choose a solo course. What she was seeking was special treatment. And that's why this conversation is happening. It's not about, she paid it ultimately. She did pay the fine ultimately, but equally, she could have paid the fine initially, never asked the civil service about a special solo course just for herself.
She could have asked for a solo course on her own account.
She could,
and maybe she could have said, I'm worried about security or something of that kind, but she got the government machine, or contemplated asking the government machine to do that, which is a distinction. And there's also another point. We're going to get the immigration figures up very soon. That is a bigger bag of potatoes altogether, which could be a crunch, and that's where you really look at Suella Braverman and what is the agenda there.
Yeah, and I think that's what some people are saying. You know, she suggested in the Commons this afternoon when she was pushed on this issue by the Labour Party, she said, look, you know, Labour are using this as a distraction. You don't like my Rwanda policy. You don't like how tough I'm talking on immigration. And actually, ultimately, she was interrupted by the Speaker for making a speech in what should have been a question and answer session. But, you know, her point, and clearly the strength of feeling was evident, is that not a lot of people like her or her approach to this issue. But the numbers involved here, I mean, billions of pounds the government is spending on housing asylum seekers around the UK. The policy, there is no real policy. It doesn't work. It's not effective. She has suggested a policy that the government has decided to adopt, which is gummed up in the courts. I think the problem at the moment is that she is the sort of lightning rod, if you like, for a lot of that criticism. And she clearly is equating these two issues. I think other people will suggest that that is not the case.
Okay.